This week has been set aside as Vocation Awareness Week, Vocation Awareness Sunday, in which we see how Jesus is calling those and seeking and saving the lost. There are traditionally 5 vocations that one can follow in life. That is, in marriage, to be a husband or father, or a wife and mother, vocation to the priesthood, religious life, or consecrated single life. A vocation is coming from the Latin word vocare, which means calling. And so in this vocation, God is calling, or Jesus is calling, and we're the ones responding. So since it's what God is calling, we have to ask the question in prayer, not what do I want to do in my life, but what does God want me to do in my life? Our happiness is found in following the Lord's will in our lives. At first, sometimes we can have resistance to God's call, thinking that's not what I want to do, but then acceptance and much greater joy in seeing the gift of following God. In my own vocation to the priesthood, I didn't necessarily want to become a priest. And when I read the brochure in the paper from the seminary saying that there are many men who, after a few years at the seminary, decide they're not called to the priesthood, they announce that they've discerned they're not called, and the people applaud as they leave the seminary. So I thought, that's what I'll do. I'll go there a year, then they'll applaud as I've discerned I'm not called to the priesthood. But that's what God used to get me there in the first place. Second is, if God is calling, then we're the ones responding. Jesus says, beg the harvest master for laborers for the harvest, because the harvest is plenty, but laborers are few. And that means we have to be in a place where we can hear Jesus' call, which means prayer, especially adoration of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. In order to hear God's calling, we have to take at least 15 minutes of quiet prayer every day. So we can not just talk to God, but also listen to Him to say, how is He calling us in our lives? If our day is taken up with noise and distractions, it's going to be more difficult to hear God as He's calling us and speaking to us. Third is lending your voice to Christ. He can call through others who ask if you've ever thought about becoming a priest or a religious sister. And for those of you in the parish who already have your vocation, you can invite others to think about priesthood or religious life by asking them about it, especially your own children and grandchildren. It used to be an honor to have a vocation to priesthood or religious life in your own family, but the vocation directors tell us today the greatest obstacle now is the parents who try to discourage any thoughts of priesthood or religious life. And so once again, we have to ask the question, what do we want versus what does God want? The truth is, there is a need for many holy vocations to help bring people to Christ and the salvation of their souls. All the things that we do on earth and the possessions we build up count for nothing if our souls are lost in the end. We desperately need men and women to be willing to respond to Jesus' call to give their lives for the salvation of souls. And that is in teaching the faith, serving in hospitals and schools, religious sisters, praying, and priests bringing Christ to others by means of the sacraments, being able to forgive their sins and set them free. Only the priest can change the bread and wine at Mass into the body and blood of Christ by his words to make Jesus present. What are some other obstacles to vocations to priesthood and religious life? Is my own sinfulness. We say, I may feel like I'm not good enough to be a priest or a sister. I sin too much. And this is where the sacrament of confession can be helpful, to regularly receive forgiveness through the sacrament of reconciliation so we can clearly see God's call in our lives. Look at many of the people that God called in scriptures. Moses murdered an Egyptian. David committed adultery and murder. St. Paul ordered the killing of St. Stephen. St. Augustine lived a life of impurity. But all these were called to become holy men after God's own heart. With God's grace, all things are possible. God knows the weaknesses we have and the ways that we're going to fall, but he wants us and chooses us anyway. We look at the gospel today with Zacchaeus, who was a tax collector and a sinner, and known to be such by the people in the town. And yet Jesus chose to go to his house and stay and spend the night. And even when the people grumbled and complained and they spoke badly about him, he stood his ground. He didn't give in to the fear of what other people would think. He said, I'm going to give half of what I have to the poor. If we follow and pursue a vocation to priesthood or religious life, there is that fear that other people might think, are you some kind of Jesus freak? Well, if you mean my heart has been overwhelmed by love, then yes, God is love. We also need and pray for vocations to marriage life today. The commitment to give yourself completely to your husband and wife for the rest of your life. The rate of marriage has declined greatly in the church, just even in the last few years. When I first was assigned to Adrian, there were 20 weddings that summer, or that year, and now I have, this past year, just 2 marriages. So there's a need for vocations to married life as well. And here too, we're afraid, there's a fear, what if it doesn't work out? But we know that God will provide. This isn't just wishful thinking to say we can pray and God will provide. Because, we've been praying the rosary and other intentions for favorable weather for a good harvest, and God has provided that this fall. So it strengthens our faith to bring our needs and cares to God in prayer, who then provides. Ask and you will receive. There is no problem so great that God can't overcome it. As we prepare today for Holy Communion, we recognize Jesus is coming to stay in your heart, in your house tonight. How do we want to prepare ourselves to receive this divine guest?